My name is Vanessa Sharp. I spent my whole life dreaming of a perfect wedding, but I never imagined the people who were supposed to love me the most would be the ones to tear it apart. Ever since I was a little girl, I had this vivid picture of my wedding day. It wasn't just a passing fantasy. It was a sacred vision carefully built from years of watching romantic movies, flipping through bridal magazines, and attending countless weddings where I whispered to myself, "One day that will be me." I could see it all so clearly, the soft lace of my dress trailing behind me as I walked down the aisle, the gentle sunlight filtering through the stained glass windows, and most importantly, my parents sitting in the front row, smiling proudly, their eyes filled with tears of joy. I never imagined they would be the very reason those tears would instead come from heartbreak. When I met Daniel, my now husband, everything just clicked. He wasn't just the man I wanted to marry, he was the man who made me believe that love could be safe, that family could be chosen, that I didn't have to keep chasing approval from people who made me feel small. And from the moment he slipped that ring on my finger, my childhood dream reignited in full force. I wanted a wedding that reflected who we were, a day filled with joy, authenticity, and the people who truly supported us. I threw myself into planning with a passion I had never felt before. I spent months carefully selecting every detail, from the soft blush color of the bridesmaids' dresses to the rustic barn venue that would make our special day feel intimate and warm. I even handwrote the invitations, pouring love into each word, as if that could somehow guarantee a perfect outcome. I wasn't just planning an event, I was creating a memory that I hoped would finally bring my family together. But somewhere quietly beneath the excitement there were cracks. Small, almost invisible at first. My mother frowned when I told her we weren't going to have the ceremony in a grand cathedral like she had always envisioned. "You can't seriously think a barn is appropriate for our family," she said, half laughing, half judging. My father raised an eyebrow when he found out Daniel and I had decided to write our own vows. "Tradition exists for a reason, Vanessa. You don't need to reinvent everything," he warned. At the time, I brushed it off. I told myself it was normal wedding stress, that parents always have opinions, that they'd come around. I even laughed with Daniel about it, saying, "They just need time to adjust. It'll all be fine." I wanted to believe that so badly. The closer the big day came, the more their comments shifted from passive remarks to sharper jabs. My mother criticized the catering choices, insisting that no proper wedding should serve comfort food instead of a formal 5-course meal. My father started making dismissive comments about Daniel's family, subtly implying they weren't our kind of people. Still, I clung to the dream. I thought if I worked harder, if I included them more, they would eventually feel proud. I invited my mother to dress fittings, hoping to soften her. I asked my father to give a speech, desperate to keep him involved. I believed that love, effort, and inclusion would bridge the growing gap. But their hearts were not where mine was. Looking back, I can see the warning signs so clearly now: their forced smiles, their constant need to control every detail, their obsession with how things would appear to extended family and friends. They didn't care about me. They cared about the show. I remember the night I called my mom to excitedly tell her I'd booked a local acoustic band instead of hiring a traditional wedding orchestra. There was a long pause on the phone before she finally said coldly, "It sounds cheap, Vanessa. Is that really the image you want to give people?" That moment stuck with me. It should have been a turning point. I should have realized then that their vision of the day had nothing to do with my happiness. But I was still that little girl, desperate to see them smiling in the front row. So I kept pushing forward. I kept dreaming. I convinced myself that once they saw me in my wedding dress, once they watched me exchange vows with Daniel, all the tension would melt away. That somehow the love we shared would be enough to silence their judgment. I see now that I was chasing a fantasy, one that cost me more than I could have imagined. The wedding day was supposed to be the culmination of everything I'd worked for, a celebration of love, of family, of new beginnings. But it was also the day everything unraveled. The people I thought would be my greatest supporters became the architects of my deepest heartbreak. And though I didn't know it yet, this was only the beginning of the disaster that would forever change the way I saw my parents and myself. If I'm honest, the signs were always there, I just didn't want to see them. After I got engaged, I told myself that the small arguments, the lingering silences, and the occasional biting comments from my parents were just the usual bumps in the road. I was so determined to hold on to the picture-perfect family in my mind that I ignored the slow, creeping truth that my parents didn't truly support the life I was building. It started subtly, like a faint crack in a glass window. My mom would make these little comments, in passing ones that didn't seem harsh on the surface, but stung when I sat with them later. "You sure you don't want to wait a little longer before getting married? There's no rush, you know." It wasn't the words, it was the tone. Like she thought I wasn't ready. Like I was making a mistake. My dad was quieter. His disapproval didn't come through lectures or arguments, it came through absence. He would forget important meetings with the wedding planner. He'd miss calls. He started showing up late to family dinners and leaving early. When I'd ask him what was going on, he'd brush me off. "I've got work, Vanessa, it's just been a busy season." But I knew better. I just didn't want to admit it. One moment that stays with me was when I asked them to meet Daniel's parents for the first time over brunch. I thought it would be a lovely way to bring both families together. But the entire time my mom was cold and dismissive. She corrected Daniel's mother when she made a casual comment about the venue as if she knew better. My dad barely engaged at all, spending most of the meal scrolling through his phone. When we left, I asked her what she thought. "They seem nice," she said with a tight smile. "But we're just very different people. You'll understand one day." Different. That was the word that kept resurfacing. It was like they couldn't accept that I had chosen someone outside of their carefully curated social bubble. I began to realize that their vision of my life had nothing to do with my happiness. It had everything to do with appearances. It had always been that way, but until now I hadn't seen it. Or maybe I'd spent years convincing myself it was love, when really it was control disguised as concern. As the months went by, the cracks widened. When I picked out my wedding dress, a simple, elegant gown that made me feel like the truest version of myself, my mother's reaction gutted me. "It's nice. But don't you think it's a little plain? People will expect something grander." I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask her, who are these people we're performing for? But instead, I swallowed my disappointment, smiled weakly, and told her I'd think about it. I didn't want to fight. I just wanted peace. But peace was not what I was going to get. My dad started questioning the guest list. He wanted to invite people I barely knew, old business partners, distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. When I pushed back, he said, "Vanessa, this isn't just your day, it's our family's reputation on display." Those words sat like ice in my chest. My day, my love, my life. Yet somehow it was still about them. I remember sitting on the floor of my living room one night, surrounded by wedding magazines, crying into my hands because I couldn't figure out whose wedding I was planning anymore. It felt like the day was slowly being hijacked by expectations, social image, and silent power plays. Daniel saw it, of course. He would gently ask, "Do you really want to keep doing this? Maybe we can elope, you know. Maybe we can make this just about us." And I would always answer the same way. "No, I can fix this. I just need more time." But the more I tried to fix it, the more I lost pieces of myself along the way. The week before the wedding, the tension boiled over. My mom called me in tears, furious that I hadn't changed the menu to accommodate her last-minute demands. She accused me of being selfish, of not caring about the family's image. "After everything we've done for you, you can't even give us this." It broke something in me that day. But I still didn't walk away. I still clung to the hope that once the music played, once I walked down that aisle, it would all somehow fall into place. Looking back, I know now that I was desperately trying to hold on to a version of my parents that didn't exist. I wanted their acceptance so badly that I ignored the slow unraveling of their support. I convinced myself that they were just stressed, that deep down they loved me, that this would pass. But the truth. The cracks in the foundation had been forming long before Daniel entered my life. The wedding just brought them to the surface. And what I failed to see at the time was that the people who are supposed to stand with you shouldn't need to be convinced. They should be there because they love you, not because they're curating a performance for the world. I thought I could patch the cracks. I didn't know the whole house was about to collapse. I always imagined my wedding day would feel like magic. I thought I'd wake up to sunlight streaming through the window, surrounded by love, calm, and quiet excitement. I thought I would glide through the morning effortlessly beautiful, feeling like I belonged in every perfect moment. Instead, I woke up to chaos. From the moment my eyes opened, something felt wrong. My phone buzzed endlessly on the nightstand, flooding with frantic messages. The florist had called in a panic. The flowers my mother had personally rearranged the week before hadn't arrived. She had changed the order behind my back, claiming it would better suit the family's image. But her changes had delayed the delivery, and now the ceremony space was bare. I tried to stay calm. I tried to remind myself it was just flowers. We could find a way to fix it. But before I could even breathe, another issue rolled in. My mother was missing. No one could find her. She was supposed to be with me getting ready, but her phone went straight to voicemail. The woman who had spent months micromanaging every detail had suddenly disappeared on the morning that mattered most. The bridal suite buzzed with nervous energy, but I forced a smile as my friends and bridesmaids fluttered around me, doing their best to salvage the situation. I told myself she would show up. She always did. Late maybe, but she would come. She wouldn't miss this. But the clock ticked on and she didn't come. The ceremony was set to begin at 2 p.m. By 1:30, the panic began to bleed into my skin, tightening my chest with every second that passed. I texted my dad asking if he knew where she was. His reply came in cold and sharp. "She's handling some things. I'll walk you down the aisle. Try to stay focused." It wasn't comforting, it was dismissive. When I stepped outside to take photos before the ceremony, I was met with another shock. The band I had carefully chosen, the one I had booked months in advance, because they played the acoustic style Daniel and I loved, was not there. In their place was a string quartet I had never seen before. Confused, I asked the coordinator what happened. "Your father canceled the original band yesterday. He said it didn't reflect the family's standards." I stood there numb, my veil fluttering in the soft breeze, realizing that piece by piece they had dismantled my day and rebuilt it in their image. I wanted to scream. I wanted to call it all off. But people were arriving. Daniel's family had already taken their seats. My friends were waiting. I felt trapped in a beautiful cage, forced to perform a role I no longer recognized. When the ceremony finally started, I searched the crowd for my mother. She was still nowhere to be found. My dad took my arm as if nothing was wrong, guiding me down the aisle while my heart pounded against my ribs. But as I took my first step, he whispered, "Let's get this over with." The words sliced through me. Get this over with. Was that all this was to him? A burdensome formality. I tried to focus on Daniel. His steady eyes anchored me, his quiet strength giving me just enough to keep moving forward. He didn't know the full extent of what had been happening behind the scenes. I had kept most of it from him, thinking I could shoulder the weight alone. But the weight was now crushing me. When the officiant invited my father to give his speech I had begged him to make, hoping it would be a moment of reconciliation, he stepped up to the microphone, cleared his throat, and said something I will never forget. "When your child chooses a path you wouldn't have chosen for them sometimes, you just have to sit back and watch the consequences unfold." The room fell into an uneasy silence. My heart plummeted. He smiled faintly, like he believed what he said was profound, like he thought this was his last chance to remind me I was wrong. Daniel reached for my hand, gripping it tightly. I could feel his pulse fast and furious, a mirror of mine. I wanted to disappear. When the ceremony ended, my mother finally appeared. She acted as though nothing had happened. She smiled for the cameras. She mingled with the guests. But I couldn't shake the knowledge that she had intentionally sabotaged the morning. She had wanted to send a message without ever having to say the words. The reception was no better. Seating charts had been rearranged without my consent. Daniel's family was placed at the far edge of the hall, almost as if they were outsiders looking in. The playlist I had carefully selected gone, replaced with classical music that sucked the warmth out of the room. I floated through the evening in a daze, going through the motions, clinking glasses, pretending to laugh, all while something inside me slowly broke apart. By the end of the night, I didn't even recognize my own wedding. What was supposed to be the most beautiful day of my life had been turned into a silent battleground, a place where my parents made sure I knew just how little control I truly had. And the cruelest part, they did it all with smiles on their faces as if they hadn't just set fire to the most precious memory I had tried to build. That day didn't just mark the beginning of my marriage. It marked the beginning of the end of my relationship with them. The morning after my wedding was supposed to be filled with soft sunlight, sore feet from dancing, and a heart swollen with joy. I should have woken up next to Daniel laughing about how fast the day had gone by, scrolling through sweet messages from family and friends, reliving every precious moment. But instead I woke up hollow. There was no laughter, no excitement, no butterflies, just silence. I lay there staring at the ceiling, the weight of what had happened sinking deeper into my bones. I could feel Daniel's steady breath beside me, his hand resting gently over mine, but even his presence couldn't pull me out of the fog that had settled over me. Everything was a blur. I barely remembered eating at the reception. I didn't remember cutting the cake. I had smiled so much my cheeks physically hurt, but none of those smiles had been real. It all felt like a lie. Daniel turned to me, his voice soft but steady. "Vanessa, we need to talk about yesterday." I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to pull apart the pieces of that disaster, to relive the humiliations, the betrayals, the crushing weight of knowing that my parents had ruined the most important day of my life without even flinching. But Daniel was right. We sat on the edge of the bed for a long time, holding hands, trying to untangle the knots in our chests. His anger was palpable, though he spoke calmly. He told me how hurt he was, not just for me, but for his family, how they had been pushed to the margins, how they had been made to feel small and unimportant. They didn't just disrespect you, Vanessa. They disrespected us. They disrespected our marriage. His words cut deep, not because they were harsh, but because they were true. I had spent months shielding my parents from criticism, excusing their behavior, trying to fix things to please everyone. I had convinced myself they would come around eventually. But now, there was no room left for excuses. The devastation of that day wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a logistical error. It was intentional. And I couldn't run from it anymore. What followed were some of the hardest weeks of my life. Every morning, I would wake up with a tightness in my chest, the memories crashing over me like waves I couldn't swim against. My phone buzzed constantly, messages from friends congratulating me, photos from guests, people asking when we'd be back from our mini honeymoon. But the texts I dreaded the most were from my mother. She messaged me as if nothing had happened. "You looked beautiful yesterday. Everyone said the ceremony was lovely. Don't forget to send thank you notes to your father's colleagues. Let's have brunch soon to talk about your honeymoon plans." There was no acknowledgement, no apology, no space for the truth. It was like she had rewritten the story overnight, like the disaster had been nothing but a blip she could gloss over with pleasantries and to-do lists. When I finally gathered the courage to call her, I asked her why she had changed the band, why she had rearranged the seating, why she disappeared on the morning of my wedding. I needed to understand. I needed to hear her say it out loud. Her voice was cold, distant. "I did what I thought was best for the family, Vanessa. You've always been too emotional. Sometimes you need someone to step in and make the hard decisions." That sentence shattered me. She didn't regret it. She didn't see what she had done as sabotage. She saw it as her duty, as if she had saved me from myself. My father wasn't any better. When I called him, he dismissed my pain entirely. The day went fine. You're overreacting. A few minor changes don't ruin a wedding. But it wasn't just a few changes. It was my entire day stripped of the meaning Daniel and I had worked so hard to create. I realized then that I had been chasing their approval for so long, I had lost sight of the fact that their love came with conditions. Love that only existed if I played by their rules. Love that only showed up if I performed the version of me they wanted to see. The grief hit me like a slow-burning fire. It wasn't just about the wedding, it was the collapse of a lifelong dream. The fantasy that one day they would see me, love me, and support me exactly as I was. I spent nights sobbing in the kitchen, my hands shaking as I washed dishes I couldn't even remember using. I lost sleep. I lost my appetite. I lost the version of myself that always believed family would come through in the end. But in those quiet, broken moments, Daniel was there. He sat with me through the silence. He held me when I couldn't hold myself. You don't have to keep choosing them at the expense of yourself, he whispered to me one night. And that's when the slow shift began. I started to accept that I couldn't go back. I couldn't pretend it hadn't happened. I couldn't force a connection with people who refused to meet me halfway. The wedding day may have been over, but the damage lingered like smoke in the air, something you can't see, but can't stop breathing in. I realized that the fairy tale I had written for myself didn't need to include them. It was the most painful lesson I had ever learned. Sometimes the family you're born into can hurt you more than any stranger ever could. For weeks after the wedding, I lived in a strange in-between. I wasn't ready to cut my parents out, but I also couldn't bring myself to act like nothing had happened. It was as if I was floating above my life, watching everything from a distance, waiting to see if they would ever acknowledge the damage they had caused. Some part of me still clung to hope. Some stubborn, aching part of me still wanted to believe they could change. Daniel was patient, though I could sense his exhaustion. He supported me, but I knew he struggled with how long I held the door open for people who had slammed it in his face. You don't owe them anything, Vanessa, he would remind me softly but firmly. But if you need to try, I'll stand with you. So I tried. I invited my mother to lunch a month after the wedding. I picked her favorite restaurant, a quiet little bistro she used to love. I thought maybe if we met in a neutral place away from the tension of family homes, we could find some middle ground. She arrived perfectly composed, as if nothing had fractured between us. She smiled, complimented my outfit, asked about Daniel like she was reading from a script. When I finally gathered the courage to bring up the wedding, my voice shook. Mom, I need to talk about what happened. I need to understand why you did those things. Why you weren't there for me that morning. She didn't flinch. She set her fork down delicately and said, You're still holding on to that, Vanessa. Sometimes you need to move forward. Dwelling on small things will only make you bitter. Small things, she called them small things. The last-minute sabotage, the speech that humiliated me, the disappearance on the most important morning of my life. Small things. I pressed her. I explained how her choices made me feel, how they pushed Daniel's family aside, how they made our entire day feel like it wasn't ours at all. Her answer was always the same. I was doing what I thought was best. One day you'll see that. I left that lunch with a stomach full of untouched food and a heart heavier than when I'd arrived. But I didn't stop trying. I called my father a few days later, asking if we could sit down, just the two of us. I told him I wanted to rebuild, that I missed him, that I was willing to talk things through. When we met, his words felt like glass underfoot, sharp, cold, impossible to navigate. Vanessa, you've always been too sensitive. You overreacted. Your mother and I had your best interests at heart. You just didn't understand the pressure we were under. The pressure. He kept circling back to it, like the weight of society's expectations was a valid excuse for steamrolling his own daughter's happiness. I realized then that my parents weren't just unwilling to apologize. They truly didn't believe they had done anything wrong. They expected me to move on, to accept that what was done, and to fold myself back into the role I had always played, the agreeable daughter who didn't ask for too much. But something inside me had changed. The girl who would have swallowed her pain just to keep the peace was gone. The conversations continued in waves over the next few months, some calm, some stormy, all unproductive. My parents dismissed my feelings as childish, calling my distance immature and disrespectful. Family is family, Vanessa. You don't walk away from blood. That phrase haunted me. They wielded it like a weapon, as if biology gave them a lifetime pass to hurt me without consequence. There were moments I thought about giving up entirely. Moments I wondered if it would be easier to just fall back into old patterns to plaster on the smile to let them believe they had won. After all, the cost of staying angry felt suffocating. But Daniel always reminded me of the cost of silence. You can't keep breaking your own heart to preserve their comfort. So I kept the door open, but I stopped chasing them through it. I wrote letters I never sent. I rehearsed conversations in the mirror that never happened. I spent sleepless nights trying to figure out how to balance loyalty to my family with loyalty to myself. The hardest part wasn't the fights. It was the quiet distance that followed. The birthdays with no phone calls. The holidays where their seats at the table stayed empty. The milestones where I had to learn to celebrate without them. It was grieving the living. It was learning to accept that sometimes the people you love won't love you in the way you need them to. I don't know if they'll ever truly understand the depth of what they took from me. I don't know if they'll ever see how their need for control cost them their place in my life. But I know I tried. I reached across the chasm. I offered them the chance to rebuild. I gave them opportunity after opportunity to meet me halfway. They chose pride. And I chose peace. It wasn't the ending I wanted, but it was the one I needed. Some choices don't feel like choices at all. They feel like survival. After months of reaching out, of begging to be heard, of offering forgiveness to people who never asked for it, something inside me quietly began to shift. It wasn't a single explosive moment. It wasn't a door slamming or a final scream. It was more like erosion, steady, silent, inevitable. One morning, I woke up and realized I didn't have the strength to keep chasing people who were perfectly comfortable watching me walk away. The hardest part wasn't deciding to step back from my parents, it was accepting that I had to. I spent so much of my life believing that family was forever, that no matter what, they would always be my home. But what do you do when home becomes the very thing that's burning you? It started with simple boundaries. I stopped answering their calls immediately. I let texts sit unread. I stopped feeling obligated to rush to their side, especially when their contact came without accountability, without change, without acknowledgement. At first I felt guilty. So guilty. There's a voice that's been stitched into me since childhood that whispers, "Good daughters don't walk away. Good daughters make it work." But I was learning slowly that being a good daughter doesn't mean being a perpetual sacrifice. When my birthday came, I didn't expect much. But when I opened their card, the message inside shattered me all over again. It wasn't a heartfelt apology. It wasn't a step toward healing. It was a single cutting sentence. "We hope you find your way back to your family someday." As if I had gotten lost. As if I was the one who had walked away for no reason. That was the moment something in me crystallized. I wasn't the lost one. I wasn't the one who needed to come crawling back. I had found my own way, and it just didn't lead to them. I realized I had spent my entire life performing for their love. Every choice I made was carefully curated to fit into the mold they had designed for me. And when I finally stepped outside that mold, when I finally chose happiness over image, they couldn't bear it. The wedding wasn't the beginning of the problem, it was simply the moment their grip on me slipped. From that day forward, I started rebuilding my life on my terms. I stopped sending them updates out of obligation. I stopped bending my life into shapes that would make them comfortable. Instead, I focused on building a life that made me feel safe, loved, and free. Daniel and I moved into a cozy townhouse with a tiny backyard that we filled with string lights and worn-out lawn chairs. On Saturday mornings, we'd drink coffee together under the soft sunrise, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I could breathe. I surrounded myself with people who chose me not out of blood ties, but because they genuinely wanted to be part of my life. Friends who celebrated me without conditions. Daniel's family who had every right to be angry about how they were treated at the wedding, but instead welcomed me with open arms as if I had always belonged. There were days when the grief would still sneak up on me. I'd see a mother and daughter laughing in a coffee shop and feel a hollow ache in my chest. I'd hear a father's speech at a friend's wedding and swallow the lump in my throat knowing I would never get that moment. But I was learning to live with the ache. I was learning that grief doesn't always mean you made the wrong choice. Sometimes grief is just the cost of choosing yourself. For so long I thought I needed their approval to feel whole. I thought I couldn't be complete without their blessing. But the further I walked down this new path, the more I realized I wasn't missing pieces, I was shedding weights that were never mine to carry. This new reality wasn't easy. There were family gatherings I didn't attend. There were holidays where their absence echoed loudly around the dinner table. There were extended relatives who called me selfish, who begged me to reconsider, who said things like, "But they're your parents. You only get one set." I know I only get one set. And I also know that love without respect is not a home, it's a prison. Choosing distance wasn't about punishment. It was about protection. It was about finally understanding that some bridges can't be repaired when one side refuses to build. In this new chapter, I chose peace over performance. I chose authenticity over approval. I chose to stop proving my worth to people who had already decided I wasn't enough. I still wish things had been different. I still wish my wedding day had been a celebration, not a battlefield. But I don't wish for their version of love anymore. Because now I know what real love feels like, and I refuse to settle for anything less. Forgiveness used to sound like surrender to me. For most of my life, I thought forgiving someone meant telling them it was okay, that what they did didn't hurt, that I was somehow over it. I thought it meant giving them another chance to sit at the table, another opportunity to pull the rug from beneath me. But life has a strange way of teaching you things when you least expect it. After months of distancing myself from my parents, after building a new life brick by brick with Daniel, I realized I was still carrying them, just in a different way. Their voices lived inside my head, repeating old lines like broken records. "You're too emotional. You're too sensitive. You don't understand what's best for you." Even though I had cut the physical ties, I hadn't let go of the emotional ones. They lingered in the quiet moments, in the silence, after a hard day, in the middle of celebrations. I felt guilty for enjoying, in the restless nights, where I questioned whether I was allowed to be this happy without them. The anger would rise without warning. I would replay every scene from my wedding like a movie I couldn't escape. The sabotage, the manipulation, the coldness, I would cycle through the memories, sometimes with tears, sometimes with shaking fists. I wanted them to suffer the way I had. I wanted them to wake up one day and feel the crushing weight of losing me. I wanted them to regret it so badly they'd crumble under the pressure. But revenge, emotional or otherwise, never filled the hole. It only deepened it. Daniel noticed before I did. He gently nudged me toward therapy, not because he wanted to fix me, but because he wanted me to finally set the weight down. I was hesitant. I was afraid of what would come up. I was afraid I'd be told I was wrong to walk away. But therapy became the mirror I didn't know I needed. It showed me that I didn't need to wait for an apology to begin healing. I didn't need their remorse to free myself. I began to understand that forgiveness isn't a gift you give to the people who hurt you, it's a release you give to yourself. So I started small. I forgave myself first. I forgave myself for not seeing the signs sooner. I forgave myself for the years I spent chasing their approval. I forgave myself for staying silent when I should have spoken up. I forgave the version of me that thought love had to be earned. With time, I extended that forgiveness toward them, not because they deserved it, but because I didn't want to carry their weight anymore. I was tired of dragging them into every joy, every memory, every corner of my new life. I didn't call them to tell them I had forgiven them. Forgiveness wasn't about reopening the door. It was about walking away without the need to look back. I began creating new rituals to care for myself, things that reminded me I was safe now. Morning walks with Daniel where we would talk about everything and nothing. Journaling, pouring out the words I never said to my parents, watching the ink soak into the paper like a quiet release. I even planted a small garden in our backyard. Flowers. I chose colors I loved without anyone else's approval. I began to find pieces of myself in those small moments. The more I showed up for myself, the quieter their voices became. I used to believe forgiveness would feel like fireworks, a grand cinematic moment of clarity. But it didn't come like that. It arrived slowly, like soft waves smoothing out jagged rocks. It arrived in the days I stopped checking my phone for their messages. In the nights I stopped rehearsing conversations that would never happen. In the moments I could finally celebrate without guilt. There's something profoundly freeing about letting go of a story. You've outgrown the story, where you're always the disappointed daughter, always trying to earn your place, always waiting for their approval to feel whole. I let that story go. I wrote a new one where I am the author, not a supporting character in their performance. One where my worth isn't up for debate. One where joy isn't something I have to apologize for. Forgiveness gave me back the parts of myself I thought I had lost. It didn't repair the relationship. It didn't bring them back into my life. It didn't erase the pain, but it unshackled me from the expectation that they would ever be what I needed them to be. The truth is, some people can't love you the way you deserve. The truth is, some people never say sorry. And yet life goes on. Love goes on, healing goes on. I chose to forgive not because they asked for it, not because they earned it, but because I wanted to live a life that wasn't tied to their shadow. Forgiveness didn't make me weak, it made me free. There's something no one tells you about moving forward. It's not a grand sweeping decision. It's not fireworks or some cinematic moment where you finally slam the door shut and feel instantly free. Moving forward is quiet. It's slow. It's made up of small, steady choices that you have to make over and over again. In the beginning, I thought that cutting contact with my parents would feel like flipping a switch, that once I stepped back, the pain would dissolve, the anger would vanish, and I'd feel light again. But that's not how it worked. The first few months were brutal. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was deafening. I kept waiting for the phone to ring, for a letter to arrive, for some kind of sign that they were ready to meet me halfway. But they didn't reach out. Not once. Not even to check in. And maybe that's what I needed to finally understand, that they weren't waiting on the other side of the door. They had already moved on, rewriting their version of the story, probably telling everyone that I was the one who abandoned them. So I stopped waiting. I began building firm, intentional boundaries, not just for them, but for myself. I stopped sending family updates. I stopped attending gatherings where I knew I'd be cornered by relatives who would guilt-trip me back into submission. I stopped checking social media for glimpses into their lives. It wasn't easy. The guilt was a constant ache, especially in the early days. There's this voice that gets drilled into you when you grow up in a family like mine, a voice that says you owe them your loyalty no matter how much it costs you. But here's what I've learned. Boundaries aren't walls meant to punish. They're fences that protect what you're growing. And I was finally growing a life I could call my own. Daniel and I started to thrive in ways I never expected. Without the weight of their judgment, our home became lighter, warmer. We filled our weekends with spontaneous road trips, lazy afternoons in bookstores, and endless conversations over takeout. We laughed more. We fought less. We built rituals that belonged to us. Sunday morning pancakes. Tuesday evening movie nights, dancing in the kitchen while waiting for the coffee to brew. For the first time, my happiness wasn't conditional. It wasn't something I had to earn or explain. It just was. And yet, even in all that joy, I still had to consciously choose myself. There were moments when old habits tried to drag me back. A cousin would call asking if I'd come to a family wedding, An aunt would text, sending subtle reminders that family should always come first. It would have been so easy to fall back into that pattern, to shrink myself again, to say yes, just to keep the peace. But I had learned something precious. Every time I say yes to someone who disregards my boundaries, I say no to myself. And I've spent enough of my life saying no to myself. So I politely declined the invitations. I gently let those relationships fade, and I stood firm when the guilt came knocking. Choosing yourself doesn't mean you stop loving people. It means you stop abandoning yourself to keep them comfortable. In this new chapter, I found strength in community. Daniel's family embraced me fully. His mother became the kind of support I always longed for, gentle, present, and endlessly kind. My friends who had once stood quietly by now filled the role of chosen family, showing up for me in ways that mattered. I built a life where I no longer had to beg to be included. And slowly, I began to trust myself again. I stopped second-guessing my choices. I stopped apologizing for my joy. I even caught myself smiling, really smiling, at my reflection in the mirror one morning, something I hadn't done in years. I realized then that happiness wasn't something I had to chase. It was something I had to claim. Of course, the grief still lingers sometimes. I won't pretend it doesn't. There are birthdays, holidays, and quiet Sunday afternoons when I still feel the echo of what could have been. But I've made peace with the ache. It's not a wound anymore. It's a scar. And scars mean healing. I know now that I didn't walk away from my parents because I stopped loving them. I walked away because I finally started loving myself. And loving myself means protecting the life I've worked so hard to build, the marriage, the friendships, the simple, ordinary joy that I once believed I didn't deserve. If you're listening to this and you're standing at the same crossroads, I hope you know this. You're allowed to choose yourself. You're allowed to put down the guilt. You're allowed to build a life that feels like home to you, even if it means some doors stay closed forever. Moving forward isn't about forgetting. It's about deciding what and who you carry with you. And this time, I'm carrying myself. Looking back on everything I've been through, the wedding, the heartbreak, the slow unraveling of my relationship with my parents, I've come to understand something I wish I had known years ago. Sometimes love comes with conditions, and sometimes you have to walk away from the people you thought would never leave. One of the most powerful lessons I've learned is that boundaries are not cruel, they are necessary. For most of my life, I believed that being a good daughter meant sacrificing my happiness to keep my parents satisfied. I thought I had to fold myself into the shape they expected, even if that meant shrinking my dreams, silencing my voice, or giving up my joy. But real love doesn't require you to disappear to make others comfortable. We often hear that family is everything, and while that can be true, it's also dangerous when used to justify toxic behavior. Family can be a beautiful source of love, but blood doesn't give anyone the right to repeatedly hurt you. Respect is not optional in any relationship, not even in a family. It took me years to realize that choosing myself wasn't an act of betrayal, it was an act of survival. Another critical lesson I've learned is that healing isn't about erasing the pain, it's about learning to carry it differently. For a long time, I thought I needed my parents' apology to move forward. I thought I couldn't fully heal until they said the right words, until they acknowledged the harm they caused. But the truth is, waiting for someone else's permission to heal keeps you trapped. I had to choose to forgive, not because they asked for it, but because I deserve to be free. Forgiveness, I've come to realize, isn't about letting them back in. It's about letting yourself out of the prison of bitterness. You don't need the person who broke you to put you back together. Joy is also something you have to actively choose. I spent so many years believing that my happiness had to be approved by others. But no one can hand you a permission slip to be happy. You have to write it yourself. You have to wake up every day and decide that your peace matters, that your life belongs to you, that you will no longer build your world around people who refuse to respect it. Most importantly, I've learned the value of choosing the people who choose you. Family isn't just who you're born to, it's who shows up, who listens, who loves you without strings attached. I found that in Daniel. I found that in my friends. I found that in Daniel's family who embraced me without judgment. It's easy to feel trapped by old narratives, the idea that you owe endless loyalty to people just because they share your last name. But I'm here to tell you, you don't have to carry guilt that was never yours to hold. If you're facing something like I did, if you're trying to protect your heart while carrying the weight of family expectations, I hope you know that stepping away doesn't make you weak. It makes you brave. It takes courage to break cycles. It takes strength to choose peace over performance. Your happiness matters. Your voice matters. And most of all, you matter even if the people you thought would love you unconditionally don't know how to show it. I am still learning, still healing, but I no longer wake up waiting for someone else to decide if I'm worthy. I've already made that decision for myself, and I hope you can too.